Hello. Today we're going to be looking at how the United States began to try to heal itself from the wounds of war. The main idea is that following the end of World War II, the U.S. military and the rest of the country had to adjust to the challenge of returning to a life of peacetime. Our learning objectives are to describe life in America after World War II and to explain the efforts to build a better world after World War II. Some experts worried that the post-war drop in industrial needs would hurt the economy. The nearly 12 million men and women who had been serving in the armed forces were returning to civilian life and would need jobs. Often jobs were not available. Women workers, so vital during the war, were pressured to leave their jobs. The Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944 was intended to help veterans make the transition to civilian life. The demand for consumer goods rose sharply after the war, and labor unions began to make demands. Racial minorities began to agitate for better opportunities. The GI Bill. The Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944 was better known as the GI Bill. It provided money for vets to attend college and to receive advanced job training. It helped to arrange for home, farm, and business loans and provide help in finding work as well as a year's worth of unemployment benefits. This resulted in increased demand. The demand for consumer goods rose sharply. Returning vets built houses, which increased the demand for furniture and appliances. And also a baby boom took place as Americans began having families. So, having just gone through the Great Depression and then World War II, many Americans had put off having their families. So we experienced a large number of births in the country in the coming 20 years after World War II, and this becomes known as the baby boom generation. And that, of course, also increased demand. Now let's look at labor unions. During the war, the government prevented labor disputes. After the war, unions began to seek increases in wages that were limited during the war. The number of strikes rose sharply, and in 1947, Congress passed the Taft-Hartley Act, which greatly reduced the power of labor unions. Racial minorities. Truman issued Executive Order 9981, which ended segregation in the U.S. Armed Forces. Hispanic veterans joined together in the American GI Forum, which is still around today. They worked to gain full access for Hispanic veterans to benefits that were earned by their service during the war. Now, let's look at post-war American politics. Starting with the 1946 congressional elections, many Democrats compared Truman unfavorably to Roosevelt. Republicans began to attack Truman before the 1946 congressional elections. Inflation was a big issue. Republicans gained a majority in Congress, which made it difficult for Truman to put his programs into place. And this leads us into the 1948 presidential election. Truman's popularity was low, and critics didn't think that he could win the election. Southern Democrats didn't like Truman's support of civil rights. Truman set off on a whirlwind campaign across the country, and Truman won the election. And of course, you can see the famed newspaper. This was taken the day after the election when Truman realized that he had won, but you can see he's holding up a newspaper that had projected that his opponent, Dewey, would win the election. And of course, the newspaper caption reads, "Dewey defeats Truman," but of course that proved to be false. And Truman put forth his Fair Deal program, building a better world. People had a strong desire to understand and to prevent the causes of war after World Wars I and II. One result was the establishment of the United Nations, or UN, and of course this replaced the League of Nations. 50 nations met in June of 1945 to create the UN Charter. The Charter committed its members to respect fundamental human rights, respect treaties and agreements, and to promote the progress and freedom of all people. Member nations agreed to live in peace. The charter called for the use of international organizations to promote economic and social advancement. As far as human rights, the UN established the Commission on Human Rights, and in December of 1948, the Commission presented the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It declared that all human beings are born free and equal. It called for an end to slavery, torture, and inhumane punishment. And it demanded a variety of civil rights, including the right to assembly and the right to access the courts. It stated that elementary education should be free and available to all. Now let's look at what the United Nations did to promote trade and economic development. At a conference in New Hampshire, leaders agreed to create the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The World Bank provides loans and grants to countries for the purpose of reducing poverty. The International Monetary Fund promoted orderly financial relationships between countries. It was designed to prevent economic crises and to encourage trade and economic growth. Another international organization, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, set rules and regulations for international trade.